All right, guys, so we are going to talk about the pretérito y el imperfecto. Okay, so this is going to be your versus between the pretérito and your versus between the imperfecto. First, we just need to remember that both of these tenses tell us about the past tense, okay? There's no way to use them interchangeably, and you'll often see these used together within the same sentence. So just like with our verbs ser and estar that we've learned before, how they mean the same thing but cannot be used interchangeably, the same thing happens here. Okay, it's important that you have to take into consideration the context and also the point of view of the speaker, because those are going to be things that help you to determine which tense, whether it's the preterite or the imperfect, that you need. We're going to go through some different tips and tricks, but once again, you do have to be able to understand the context of what is being said in order to distinguish whether you need to use the preterite or the imperfect. First, we need to review the endings for just the regular preterites and the regular imperfects. Okay, for the regular preterite ARs, we have aste, o, amos, asteis, and aron. For your regular preterite ER and IR verbs, remember it's only one chart, we have iste, io, imos, isteis, ieron. For the imperfect, we have AR regular endings is ava, abas, ava, abamos, avais, avan. And then for our regular ER-IRs in the imperfect, we have ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ian. Notice that for the imperfect, we only have an accent in the AR nosotros, so the first A in habamos. However, for ER-IRs in the imperfect, the first I of every ending is going to have an accent. Whereas on the preterite side, it's the yo form and the el ya usted form that carry accent marks. Once again, these are just the regular endings for preterite and imperfect. Preterite has all of our irregulars called the Fuji verbs. It also has your I to Ys. It has your kargars rs. So those are things that you need to keep in mind as we work through this, that all of those are still part of the preterite tense. Therefore, they can be used in place of an imperfect verb if the context deems necessary. Okay. In the imperfect, we have three irregulars. We have ser, which that's going to be our era, eras, era, éramos, erais, and then eran. You have ir, which is iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, ibais, iban, and then you also have ver, which is going to be veía, veías, veía, veíamos, veíais, and veían. So first we're going to start with the pretérito, okay, and for pretérito, just like with ser and estar, how we had doctor in place, pretérito, we use the word safe. So the first S in safe is going to stand for a specific instance or specific number of instances. So the example here that we have on the slide is él me llamó ayer, right? Specific instance is that it happened yesterday, ayer, that he called me. An example of specific number of instances, I could say, él me llamó 3 veces, right? He called me 3 times. So because I'm telling you the specific number of times that he called me, it would also be the preterite. A is going to stand for action that interrupts ongoing events or interrupting action. In this sentence, you'll notice that there is an imperfect verb, but we also have our instance of the preterite, which is going to interrupt that ongoing action. So our example sentence is, yo trabajaba cuando mi amiga se cayó. So I was working when my friend fell, okay? The ongoing action was that I was the one that was working, whereas the interrupting action was my friend falling. F is going to stand for focus on the beginning or end, okay? So our example sentence, yo terminé mi cena muy tarde anoche. Right? So I'm talking about the dinner that I was having, and specifically that I finished my dinner late. Okay? So although this is not a 100% of the time rule, when you see verbs like empezar, comenzar, terminar, completar, verbs like that that typically signal the beginning or the ending, right? To start to begin or to end to finish, you're going to be using the preterite. Not all of the time, but the vast majority of times that can be a signal to you as well. The last one is going to be for E, and that's enclosed amount of time. Our example sentence, el maestro habló por una hora completa, right? The teacher spoke or talked for a complete hour. Hopefully I won't do that for you guys, but the fact that we know that it happened for 1 full hour, right? Una hora completa, it tells us that it has to be an enclosed amount of time. This can also look something like durante 5 días, right? During 5 days, something happened, right? So durante 5 días, dormí muchísimo, right? Like I slept a lot during 5 days, okay? That's another example of enclosed amount of time. Uses of the preterite. So when we're translating kind of from English to Spanish, so to speak, the preterite usually equates to did something or a verb with its ed ending. So that could be I talked on the phone or I did my homework, right? Those are going to be completed actions for us, and that is what an example of the preterite could sound like in English. Because remember that we only have the single past tense in English, so we have to find a way to distinguish them. Also, once again, those previous reasons are obviously going to be uses of the preterite, so that's just another clue for you, right? That if in English you would be saying something with the ed ending, it has to be the preterite. Another way to kind of view the preterite is it's a very specific, because if you notice, we'll go back, if you notice we have specific instance, specific number of times, enclosed amount of times, a single action that interrupts, or even focusing specifically on the beginning or end, right? It's something that is very specific, okay? This means that your preterite can be almost a photograph or a snapshot for you of what happened. So it gives you a very small view of what the big picture is, or like what the big scene is. So think about the preterite as being just a quick little snapshot or a quick little picture of what the bigger action is, okay? Gives you just those small details or a small piece of those details, and it tells you once again about a very specific occurrence. These are some signal words. This is not an exhausted list of signal words, but these are some signal words that you'll often see with the preterite. Most of these words target either specific times of days, specific days, lengths of time. One that can be really helpful for us is this top one in the third column, right? Hace 2 días or años, right? Hace, number, duration of time. That is often going to tell you that you're going to be working with the preterite, because it's telling you about something that happened a specific amount of time ago. Okay, so hace 2 días simply means 2 days ago. Hace 2 años, right, 2 years ago. You could say hace 5 minutos, 5 minutes ago. Okay, those things are going to signal a specific time frame for something to happen. The same way, this one here in the first column, durante 2 siglos, right, for 2 centuries, something happened, right? Durante 2 días, right, during 2 days, something specific happened. So all of these are instances in which you would use the preterite. Here you have 3 sentences, so take a moment to pause the video and see if you can turn these sentences into Spanish preterite sentences. Welcome back. For our first sentence, we have Paco worked at the supermarket 2 years ago. So our sentence would be, Paco trabajó en el supermercado hace 2 años. For the second one, I read the newspaper yesterday afternoon. Yo leí el periódico ayer por la tarde. And then the last one, we ate a cake at the party last Friday. Nosotros comimos un pastel en la fiesta el viernes pasado. Moving into the imperfect, our word here is going to be waters. This is going to be a little bit more simple for us. W is going to stand for weather, okay? So if you are dealing with a weather-specific verb, like in our example here, nevar, which means to snow, nevaba mucho, right, that it snowed a lot, or it was snowing a lot, that's an example of weather. However, if you want to say it started or it began to snow, that would be an example of the preterite, because you're talking about not the weather itself, but the beginning of the weather. Okay, so if the action is the actual weather verb, like llover, nevar, hacer sol, hacer frío, things like that, that is going to be the imperfect for you. Whereas if you're talking about how the weather was changing, starting, beginning, that is going to be the preterite. A is going to stand for age, and here we have tenía 8 años, right? So I was 8 years old. That's an example of our age. Age will always, always, always be the imperfect, whether you're talking about yourself, a dog, a best friend, somebody who is deceased. You will always use the imperfect when talking about age. For time, you will also use the imperfect. It will be, you're going to be using the verb ser, so just keep that in mind. That is one of the irregulars, but you will use the verb ser to talk about time in the past using the imperfect. Emotion is going to be our E, simple enough, right? How you feel where you are, always use the verb estar, so you know that for emotion, you will most likely be using the verb estar, and it will also be in the imperfect. Repetition. So that means that something that you either did habitually or you did it many times over a length of time, that's going to fall into repetition. So the example was Ana visitaba sus abuelos de vez en cuando. So Ana visited or used to visit her grandparents often, or from time to time, right? So that's an example of the imperfect for you. The last one, settings and descriptions. Our example sentence is La vista era bonita. Okay, so we're describing the view, the fact that it was pretty. And settings and descriptions, right? This is you setting the full scene. Okay, an example of this would mean that it answers your question, what was happening, or what was some noun like, right? What was the party like? What was that person like? What was the food like? So it's going to be what was noun like. This helps to set our overarching picture, okay? The very small instances within the big picture would be the preterite. Big picture is the imperfect. So the uses of the imperfect, right? You're going to use the imperfect when you want to say that you used to do something, right? I used to go to summer camp each summer. I used to play the piano. Okay, all of those are imperfect for us. When you want to say that something is a repeated action, so our previous example sentence about visiting the grandparents, right? That she used to do that every summer, right? So that's a repeated action that it happens either every summer, or you could even say, I used to visit my friend after school, right? That was a repeated action because when did it happen? After school. And then if you want to talk about events that don't necessarily have a definite end or a definite beginning, right? I used to go to Sally's house every day, right? When would I go to Sally's house? Every day, but was it when I was 5 years old? Was it when I was 10? Not really sure, but it was something that happened repeatedly. It was something that didn't have a defined beginning or end. And then just like with the preterite, how that was a picture or a photograph of what was happening, the imperfect is going to be our video. So the way that I always describe this is that if you're thinking about your Snap story, right? Sometimes you put pictures on your Snap story, sometimes you put videos on your Snap story. Those videos are kind of setting the scene of whatever event you're at. Okay, we'll just pretend you're at a concert, okay? So you're like videoing you and your friends dancing, you listening to your favorite song that's being sang, right? All of that is going to be the imperfect because it's setting up the entire scene for everybody else. The pictures or the selfies or whatever that you add to your story, those are going to give us quick glimpses of very specific moments, right? So maybe if you're at the concert once again, maybe whoever is up on stage walks over to the area where you're standing, you snap a quick selfie, right? That is a very specific occurrence, one event that took place, and you kind of remember that by taking that photo, adding that to your story. Whereas when he comes back around the next time, maybe you're just videoing it, or you were videoing up until he came there, right? So the video is going to be your big picture, whereas the actual snapshots or the photographs or the selfies, whatever they might be, those are going to be your specific moments in time using the preterite. These are going to be our signal words for the imperfect. Once again, you can see that these are not as specific as your preterite words. They just tell you sometimes, every day, every month, frequently, over time, many times, right? So no definite end, no definite beginning, shows maybe some repetition. Definitely a little bit more broad with all of these terms, okay? Here, go ahead and pause and see if you can do these sentences. Welcome back. These ones are not going to pop up on the screen for you, but when we're talking about there was bad weather, you will say había mal tiempo or había mal clima. I was afraid of the storm. You would say yo tenía miedo a la tormenta. The next one, my grandfather was 84 years old. Mi abuelo tenía 84 años. And then for your last one, Fernando behaved badly. Fernando se portaba mal. Now, when we look at the two of these together, okay, they will appear together frequently, okay? It's not unusual to see them both in the same sentence. It's not unusual to see them in various settings together being used as two separate tenses, but in order to get the same picture across, okay? The imperfect is going to describe bigger picture of what was happening, while the preterite gives you either an interrupting action or a specific thing that happened within that big picture, okay? You can see these in fiction, in news articles, in news broadcasts, retelling of events, fairy tales, sorry, I almost called them story tales, but different short stories, fairy tales, okay, you're going to see these happen and happen together all over the time. The imperfect is going to give you, once again, that background information, set your scene, okay? Preterite tells you specific events and it interrupts an action. The last piece is that you need to be aware of verbs that change meaning. So back when we talked about the preterite initially, we had these verbs over here that changed meaning, right? Querer did not mean to want, it meant tried, versus no querer is going to be refused, okay? That is another tool that you can use to help figure out whether a verb needs to be in the preterite or the imperfect, because you can think about which meaning would make the most sense. They change meaning in the preterite, and then in the imperfect, they go back to meaning what we've always known them to be. Okay, so that's one more tool or one more trick that you can use to figure this out. Hopefully this helped to clarify a little bit the preterite and the imperfect for you. Let me know if you have questions below.